Good afternoon, I'm Alan Unell, and this series of videos is Healthcare Advocacy, where we address problems in the healthcare system, try and make a better system for all of us. Today we're going to talk about diversity and misdiagnosis and healthcare equity. So, before we get started, let me point out that down below in the description box will be a link to the Healthcare Advocacy newsletter, which is the text for today's lecture or talk. And in there you'll find hyperlinks to all kinds of news stories and studies that support what we're talking about. Okay, so let's get started. Misdiagnosis and diversity. Well, where I live, I've had to face people in positions of authority who are just done with diversity, equity, and inclusion. They don't believe there's a problem. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want it taught in schools. Their behavior is kind of like the Edvard Munch painting, The Scream. And if you actually go to the newsletter, you'll see I've included a copy of that in there. Except that they're actually holding their hands over their ears and not screaming. They're just going, la, 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 I can't hear you. Well, it turns out there is a problem with diversity, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And since we do medically related talks, let's talk about diversity in the medical world. There was a study published January 8th of 2024 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine, and of course, that link is in the newsletter. Researchers found that 1 in 4 hospital patients who died or were transferred to intensive care had experienced a diagnostic error. 18% of the misdiagnosed patients were harmed or died. That's horrible. It's estimated that about 795,000 patients a year die or are permanently disabled in the U.S. because of misdiagnosis, according to a study published last July in the BMJ Quality Safety Periodical. And of course, there's a link to that, and there's a link to a Kaiser Family Foundation news story about this whole subject. Women and racial and ethnic minorities are 20 to 30% more likely than white men to experience misdiagnosis, according to the lead author of the BMJ study. Researchers call misdiagnosis an urgent public health problem. That's actually an awful lot of people who are dead or hurt because of this. The study found that the rates of misdiagnosis range, get this, 1.5% for heart attack, 17.5% for stroke, and this one just blew me out of the water, 22.5% misdiagnosis for lung cancer. Okay, weakening of the heart muscle is the most common cause of maternal death between a week after giving birth and a year among Black women. And Black women have a very high maternal death rate in the U.S. It's actually twice as high as for white women. And we've reported on studies in the past. If you don't think that there's a diversity problem here, just listen. In the past, we have reported on studies, I believe they were in the American Medical Association journals, where they looked at first and second year med school students, and they discovered that 40% of them think that Black people have a higher threshold to pain than white people. That is, they don't have to prescribe pain medication as often. Link to the AMA report in the newsletter. In another experiment, researchers asked doctors to look at videos of actors pretending to be patients with heart disease or depression and try and make a diagnosis and recommend some follow-up action. Doctors felt far more certain diagnosing white men than they did Black patients or younger women. If doctors were uncertain, they were just less likely to take action, like ordering tests or prescribing treatment. It's easy to see why doctors are more confident diagnosing white men, because for more than a century, medical textbooks have illustrated diseases with stereotypical images of white males. If you go through the textbooks, what you'll find is that about 4.5% of the images in general medical textbooks feature patients that have darker skin. Now, that could actually help explain why patients with darker complexions are less likely to receive a timely diagnosis with conditions that affect the skin. That goes from cancer to Lyme disease, which actually causes a reddish or pinkish rash in the very early stages of infections. Black patients with Lyme disease are more likely to be diagnosed with a more advanced disease, which winds up causing arthritis and damage to the heart. Black people with melanoma are about 3 times as likely as whites to die within 5 years. Okay, remember that issue that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic? Pulse oximeters, that's the little device you put on your finger to see how much oxygen is running around in your body. They are not as accurate on darker skin as they are on lighter skin. It turns out the devices work by shining a light through the skin, and their failures delayed critical care for many Black patients. Now, in a report just released in the last week by the Pew Center, and of course, link in the newsletter, by and large, Black Americans do not express a widespread preference to see a Black healthcare provider for routine care. Although, listen to this, 64% of them say it makes no difference, but 31% of them say it would make a difference. They do want to see a Black healthcare provider. This is, of course, because the impression is they will be heard better. 31% is not zero. So you can't tell me that diversity doesn't matter. In fact, I have a quote from one of the participants in the Pew study. She was in one of the research groups. And I'll just read you her quote. "I had a situation where I had to go through about 2 different doctors until I was able to get the results I was requesting because they did not believe that the issues that I had were valid or were as serious as I made them out to be." It's kind of been an ongoing thing, so I'm always leery when I'm talking to physicians. I don't trust them just because they're doctors. I know they have the Hippocratic Oath, but it feels like it's a little different when they deal with African American patients. And I don't care if it's an African American physician or a white physician. This was a Black woman aged 25 to 39. So let's summarize the issue. People of color are not treated the way white people are treated by the medical community. This is an example of what's called systemic racism. The textbook issue we described above is very strong evidence. Med students thinking that people of color feel pain differently is also a systemic issue. They won't pay the same attention. That's the problem. Now remember we talked about the pulse oximeters? I actually met the guy that invented those. He was not aware enough of the issue to test his device against a variety of skin colorations. More awareness leads to better and more thorough scientific work and better outcomes for all of us, for patients. Look, women are not well heard by doctors, and when you combine that with the inability to take their symptoms seriously, especially cardiac issues after birth, you wind up with maternal mortality for Black women, as I said, that is twice what it is for white women. Better education is needed. That is not white male centric. More medical professionals are needed of all racial, gender, and ethnic types, because when you have a diverse population, stereotypes are just washed away through personal interaction. More awareness is called for, and we won't get that if we close our eyes to the need for diversity and equity and inclusion for all of us. That's what I've got for you today. Down below, you can like, you can share, you can subscribe. There's also, of course, at the way bottom, a link to the Healthcare Advocacy newsletter, and you can subscribe for free there, get it in your email inbox every day. If you feel motivated to call any of your elected representatives, there are also links down at the bottom of the description box where you can do that. Have a good evening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.